Welcome, wanderer of the endless seas, to the legendary chronicles of ultimate power. Tonight, we explore the titans who rule the most dangerous waters in the world. The four emperors, the Yonko, whose very names reshape the tides of fate. These are the pirates who stand closest to the throne left empty by Goldie Roger, each commanding power that could shatter islands and bend the world to their will. So settle into the gentle rhythm of ocean waves as we unveil the stories of those who have made the new world tremble, and let their epic tales carry you into peaceful slumber. The concept of being a Yonko transcends simple piracy and enters the realm of natural force, where individual will become so overwhelming that it reshapes the very nature of the seas themselves. To understand what separates these four titans from every other powerful pirate who has ever sailed the Grand Line is to comprehend the difference between lightning and the storm that births it, between the wave and the ocean that gives it meaning. The emperors are not merely strong individuals who happen to command large crews, but living embodiments of philosophies so profound and convictions so absolute that reality itself bends to accommodate their presence. The recognition of someone as a Yonko comes not through official appointment or democratic process, but through the kind of acknowledgement that thunderstorms receive from those caught in their path. It is the world's reluctant admission that a force has emerged which cannot be ignored, cannot be dismissed, and cannot be defeated through conventional means. This recognition manifests in countless small moments, when veteran pirates speak their names in hushed whispers, when marine admirals adjust their strategic planning around the mere possibility of their involvement, when entire islands alter their trade routes to avoid unwanted attention from their territories. The title carries weight that extends far beyond personal combat prowess, encompassing the ability to command loyalty from individuals who are themselves capable of destroying lesser pirate crews single-handedly. A Yonko must possess not just overwhelming personal strength, but the charisma to inspire devotion in subordinates whose own bounties exceed the lifetime earnings of most kingdoms. They must demonstrate strategic thinking capable of managing territories that span multiple islands, each with its own unique culture, resources, and challenges that require different approaches to governance and protection. What makes the Emperor system particularly fascinating is how it emerged organically from the chaos of the New World, creating a form of order that serves everyone's interests, even as it appears to be built entirely on mutual opposition. The four emperors exist in a state of perpetual tension that paradoxically creates stability, each serving as a check against the other's potential for unlimited expansion. This balance was not designed by any governing body or treaty, but arose naturally from the intersection of ambition, pragmatism, and the simple, mathematical reality that overwhelming power becomes less overwhelming when faced with equally overwhelming opposition. The territories controlled by each emperor function less like traditional pirate crews and more like sovereign nations, complete with their own laws, customs, and systems of governance that often provide superior quality of life compared to what the world government offers its citizens. Islands under emperor protection enjoy security from other pirates, fair treatment in trade negotiations, and the kind of stability that comes from knowing that any threat to their well-being would trigger retaliation from forces capable of leveling mountains and splitting seas. The unspoken rules that govern interactions between emperors reveal themselves through careful observation of what does not happen rather than what does. Direct confrontations between emperors are extraordinarily rare, not because of cowardice or lack of ambition, but because each understands the mathematics of mutual destruction that such conflicts would inevitably entail. When Shanks and Whitebeard clashed briefly, their weapons barely touched, yet the sky itself split open, demonstrating that full-scale battle between such forces would likely result in casualties that extended far beyond their immediate crews. to encompass entire regions of the New World. This restraint creates a complex diplomatic dance where threats and negotiations occur through intermediaries, symbolic gestures, and carefully orchestrated displays of power that communicate intentions without triggering the kind of escalation that would force direct confrontation. An emperor moving their fleet to a particular location becomes a statement that other emperors must interpret and respond to, creating a language of power that operates on scales and timeframes that ordinary pirates cannot begin to comprehend. The crew structures that support emperor operations reveal the incredible depth of strength required to maintain such organizations, with each level of hierarchy representing individuals who would be considered exceptional in any other context. Division commanders, suite commanders, all-stars, and other high-ranking officers possess bounties that reflect not just their individual capabilities, but their value as components in war machines, capable of challenging the world government itself. These are not merely strong pirates who happen to serve under powerful captains, but carefully selected individuals whose abilities complement their emperor's vision, while providing specialized expertise that no single person, however powerful, could master alone. The loyalty that binds these crews together operates according to different principles for each emperor, reflecting their individual philosophies and approaches to leadership. Some inspire devotion through paternal love that transforms subordinates into true family members. Others through respect, earned by consistently demonstrating superior judgment and strength. Still others through the promise of achieving shared dreams that individual effort could never accomplish. The diversity of these approaches demonstrates that there is no single path to commanding the kind of loyalty that emperors require, but all successful approaches share the common element of offering something more valuable than mere employment or protection. The world government's response to the emergence and continuation of the emperor system reveals both their recognition of the threat such forces represent and their acknowledgement of the practical limitations that constrain even their vast resources. The creation of the 7 warlords of the sea was explicitly designed as a counterbalance to emperor power, an attempt to create a buffer zone of controlled piracy that could absorb some of the chaos generated by the New World's most powerful inhabitants, while providing the government with allies whose strength approached emperor levels. The effectiveness of this strategy remains questionable, as demonstrated during the Paramount War, when the combined forces of the Marines and warlords struggled to defeat a single emperor's crew despite fighting on their home territory with extensive preparation and tactical advantages. The arrival of another emperor at that battle was sufficient to immediately end the conflict, both sides recognizing that continued fighting in the presence of such an unpredictable variable would likely result in casualties that neither could afford to sustain. The Marines' greatest nightmare, frequently discussed in their strategic planning sessions, involves the possibility of 2 emperors forming a genuine alliance rather than maintaining their current state of competitive balance. Such a development would create a concentration of power that could potentially challenge the world government's authority directly rather than simply ignoring it, transforming what is currently a containment problem into an existential threat to the established order that has governed the world for 8 centuries. This fear is not theoretical but grounded in practical assessment of what such combined forces could accomplish. 2 emperor crews working in coordination could potentially siege Mariewa itself, their combined fleets providing sufficient firepower to breach defenses that have never been seriously tested, their combined manpower overwhelming even the Marines' reserves, their combined territories providing resource bases that could sustain extended military campaigns against government installations worldwide. The delicate political maneuvering required to prevent such alliances from forming operates on multiple levels simultaneously, from direct diplomatic contact between government representatives and emperor crews, to more subtle manipulations of information, resources, and opportunities that influence emperor decision-making without revealing government involvement. This shadow diplomacy represents one of the world government's most sophisticated operations, requiring intelligence networks capable of monitoring individuals whose mere presence can disrupt communications, negotiators skilled enough to handle beings whose casual expressions of displeasure can level cities, and strategic planners capable of thinking on the same scales as people whose ambitions encompass reshaping civilization itself. The psychological profiles that government analysts maintain on each emperor read less like criminal assessments and more like natural disaster preparation documents, acknowledging that these individuals operate according to motivations and decision-making processes that transcend normal human psychology. Understanding what drives someone capable of casual destruction on such scales requires insights into forms of consciousness that most people never develop, mindsets where individual human lives register as significant, but where the suffering of thousands becomes an acceptable cost for achieving objectives that serve what they perceive as greater goods. Yet, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the emperor system is how it manages to serve the interests of ordinary people throughout the New World, despite being built entirely around the personal ambitions of individuals who possess the power to ignore anyone else's needs entirely. The stability that emerges from their competitive balance, the protection that their territories provide to civilian populations, and the economic opportunities that arise from their resource needs create benefits that extend far beyond their immediate subordinates to encompass millions of people who live better lives because the emperors exist than they would in a times New World without such powerful protectors. This paradox reveals something profound about the nature of power itself, that true strength, when wielded by individuals who possess sufficient wisdom to understand their own limitations and sufficient vision to see beyond immediate gratification, can create systems that serve everyone's interests, even when those systems appear to be built entirely on conflict and competition. The emperors represent not chaos, but a different kind of order, one that emerges from the bottom up rather than being imposed from the top down, one that adapts organically to changing circumstances, rather than maintaining rigid structures that become obsolete as the world evolves around them. Edward Newgate entered the world not as a conqueror, but as a seeker, though what he sought was not treasure or territory, but something far more elusive and precious: the simple warmth of belonging that had been denied to him since birth. The man who would become known as Whitebeard carried within his massive frame a longing that no amount of physical strength could satisfy, a hunger that could not be fed by victory in battle or accumulation of wealth, but only by the kind of bonds that transform strangers into family and make life worth protecting, rather than merely living. His early years were marked by the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being different in ways that others fear rather than celebrate. His abnormal size and strength, making him an object of both awe and terror among those who might otherwise have become friends or companions. The island of his birth treated him as a curiosity first and a threat second, never as simply a child who needed the same love and acceptance that every human soul craves. This isolation taught him lessons about power that would shape his entire philosophy, that strength without connection was merely destruction waiting to happen, that true victory could only be measured by what you protected rather than what you conquered. The moment when young Edward first encountered Goldie, Roger was less a meeting of future rivals and more a recognition between kindred spirits who understood that the world held possibilities larger than any single person could achieve alone. Their early battles were not driven by hatred or even serious competition, but by the joy that comes from finally finding someone capable of matching your strength, someone who could serve as a measuring stick for growth that pushed beyond previously imagined limitations. Each clash taught them more about themselves than about each other, revealing depths of power and purpose that might have remained forever undiscovered without such extraordinary opposition to test themselves against. The Gura Gura no Mi that would eventually define Whitebeard's fighting style was less a source of his power than a tool that allowed his true strength to manifest in ways the world could understand and fear. The earthquake abilities granted by the Tremor Tremor fruit were spectacular in their destructiveness, capable of splitting islands and generating tsunamis that could reshape coastlines. But the real source of his might lay in the absolute conviction that drove him to wield such devastating force only in service of protecting those he had chosen to call family. The fruit amplified his will rather than replacing it, turning his protective instincts into geological events that served notice to the world that some bonds were sacred enough to literally move mountains in their defense. His rivalry with Roger deepened over the years, not through escalating hatred, but through mutual respect that bordered on genuine affection, each man recognizing in the other qualities that they admired and aspired to develop within themselves. Their battles became legendary not because of their destructiveness, but because of their artistry, displays of power so perfectly matched and skillfully applied that witnessing them was like watching the ocean itself engage in conversation with the sky. When they fought, they were not trying to kill each other, but to discover what they were truly capable of when pushed beyond every limit they had previously encountered. The revelation that Roger had discovered the location of the final island and learned the true history of the world presented Whitebeard with a choice that would define not just his own legacy, but his understanding of what truly mattered in life. The Pirate King offered to share the secrets of Laugh Tale, to provide the knowledge that would make claiming the ultimate treasure a simple matter of navigation rather than the impossible quest that had consumed countless lives over the centuries. But Whitebeard's response revealed the depth of wisdom that had been growing alongside his physical power. He declined not because he lacked curiosity about such mysteries, but because he had already found something more valuable than any treasure could ever be. The family that Whitebeard built around himself was not created through conquest or coercion, but through the patient cultivation of relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. His sons came to him through various means, some rescued from circumstances that would have destroyed them, others drawn by the reputation of a captain who valued loyalty over profit, still others simply seeking the kind of belonging that the world seemed determined to deny to those who were different or dangerous or difficult to categorize. But regardless of how they arrived, each was transformed by the experience of being truly accepted for exactly who they were, rather than who they might become useful for someone else's purposes. The 16 division commanders who served as the backbone of the Whitebeard pirates represented not just exceptional fighting ability, but the full spectrum of human diversity, united under the banner of shared purpose and mutual protection. Marco the Phoenix brought not just his mythical Zoan powers, but a healer's dedication to preserving life, even in the midst of battle. Ace carried the burden of his infamous heritage, yet found in Whitebeard's acceptance the first taste of unconditional love he had ever experienced. Each commander possessed unique strengths and personalities that might have led to conflict in other crews, but here were woven together into something approaching a living organism, each part essential to the healthy functioning of the whole. The 43 allied crews that followed Whitebeard's banner did so not through formal treaties or negotiated agreements, but through the kind of organic loyalty that emerges when someone consistently demonstrates that they will honor their commitments, regardless of the personal cost. These captains maintained their own crews and pursued their own dreams, while knowing that they could call upon the world's strongest man when circumstances exceeded their individual capabilities. In return, they served as his eyes and ears throughout the New World, providing information and support that no single crew could have gathered alone, while extending his protective influence across territories too vast for even his massive organization to patrol directly. The islands that flew his flag experienced a kind of peace that was rare in the chaotic waters of the New World, not because Whitebeard imposed order through fear, but because his reputation for protecting what he claimed meant that other pirates sought easier targets rather than risking the wrath of someone whose displeasure could manifest as literal earthquakes. The protection he offered was not conditional on tribute or obedience, but simply on being claimed as part of his family, a designation he granted based on need rather than strategic value or potential profit. This approach to leadership created loyalty that ran deeper than mere employment or even friendship, transforming his crew members into people who would willingly die not for his ambitions but for the family structure he had created and maintained through decades of consistent care and protection. When Marco spoke of his captain, it was not with the respect that subordinates show to effective commanders, but with the love that sons bear for fathers, who have earned their devotion through actions rather than words. When Ace chose to pursue Blackbeard, despite direct orders to let the matter go, his decision was driven not by disrespect for Whitebeard's authority, but by the burning need to prove himself worthy of the family that had accepted him despite his cursed bloodline. The betrayal by Marshal D. Teach struck at the very heart of everything Whitebeard had built, not because Blackbeard was particularly important as an individual crew member, but because the murder of Thatch violated the most fundamental law that held their family together, that brothers did not kill brothers, that the bonds they had forged were sacred enough to transcend even the most compelling individual ambitions. The pain that this betrayal caused went far beyond the loss of 2 crew members to encompass a kind of spiritual wound that challenged Whitebeard's faith in the possibility of true loyalty, existing in a world where power and ambition seemed to corrupt everything they touched. Yet, even this devastating betrayal could not shake his commitment to the family he had created, his decision to save Ace from execution. Despite the impossible odds demonstrating that his love for his sons was not conditional on their good judgment or even their survival. The paramount war that followed was not fought to prove his strength or expand his territory, but to honor the promise implicit in calling someone your son, that you would move heaven and earth to protect them when they needed you most, regardless of what such protection might cost. The battle at Marineford revealed the true extent of Whitebeard's power, not through the earthquakes he generated or the destruction he caused, but through the loyalty he inspired in people who knew they were sailing toward almost certain death yet came anyway, because he had asked them to. The sight of his entire fleet converging on the Marine headquarters despite facing the combined forces of the Navy and the 7 warlords demonstrated what decades of genuine care and consistent protection could accomplish in terms of binding hearts together in ways that no amount of fear or financial incentive could duplicate. His performance during the war itself was made all the more remarkable by the fact that his body was failing, even as his spirit remained indomitable, age and illness sapping the physical strength that had once seemed inexhaustible while leaving his will to protect his family completely intact. Each wound he sustained was accepted not as damage to be avoided, but as a necessary cost of clearing the path for his sons to escape, his massive form serving as both shield and weapon in service of giving others the chance to live the lives he had helped them discover were worth living. The moment when Ace died in his arms represented not just personal loss, but the failure of everything he had tried to accomplish through decades of careful relationship building and patient protection. The son he had rescued from loneliness and given purpose had been killed despite every effort to save him. The bonds of family, proving insufficient to overcome the cruel mathematics of overwhelming force applied with perfect timing. Yet even in this moment of absolute defeat, Whitebeard's response revealed the depths of his character. Rather than rage or despair, he felt only gratitude for the time they had been given together and determination to ensure that his other sons would have the chance to honor Ace's memory by living the kinds of lives that would make his sacrifice meaningful. His final declaration to the world that the One Piece was real served multiple purposes simultaneously. It honored Roger's legacy by ensuring that the dream of finding the ultimate treasure would continue to inspire future generations. It provided his surviving sons with a goal that could give meaning to their continued existence, and it demonstrated to everyone watching that even death could not diminish the power of dreams when they were held by someone who truly believed in their eventual fulfillment. The statement was not just information but prophecy, a promise that the world Roger had envisioned and Whitebeard had tried to protect would eventually come to pass through the efforts of those brave enough to pursue it. The earthquake that marked his final moment was less an expression of his devil fruit power than a manifestation of the impact his life had made on the world itself, the literal shaking of the earth serving as a metaphor for how his existence had altered the fundamental structures that governed human relationships and possibilities. He died standing upright, facing the enemies who had killed his son, his body bearing the scars of protecting others, while his back remained unmarked by wounds that came from retreat or surrender. The void left by Whitebeard's death was felt not just by his immediate family, but by everyone in the new world who had benefited from the stability his presence provided. Islands that had known peace for decades suddenly found themselves vulnerable to predators who had previously been deterred by the threat of his retaliation. Pirates who had restrained their worst impulses out of respect for his reputation discovered that such restraints were no longer necessary. The balance that had maintained relative order throughout the Emperor system was shattered, creating opportunities for ambitious newcomers while leaving countless innocent people exposed to dangers they had forgotten existed. Yet perhaps the most lasting impact of his life was not the protection he provided or the power he wielded, but the example he set of what strength could accomplish when it was guided by love rather than ambition, when it served to build rather than destroy, when it created possibilities for others rather than simply accumulating advantages for oneself. The sons who survived him carried forward not just his name, but his understanding that true victory was measured not by what you conquered, but by what you enabled others to become, not by the fear you inspired, but by the love you earned, not by the treasures you accumulated, but by the family you built, and the dreams you helped others discover they were brave enough to pursue. Charlotte Linlin was born into a world that was not prepared for her existence, her unnatural size and strength making her an anomaly that defied every assumption about what children were supposed to be capable of. Even as a 5-year-old, she possessed the physical power to kill giants through what appeared to be innocent tantrums, her body somehow generating force that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics, while her mind remained trapped in the emotional patterns of normal childhood development. This fundamental disconnect between her capabilities and her understanding would shape every aspect of her life, creating a being whose good intentions were consistently undermined by the devastating consequences of her unconscious actions. The tragedy that would define her entire worldview began on Elbaf, the island of giants where her parents had abandoned her, in the desperate hope that beings large enough to match her strength might be capable of providing the guidance and containment that ordinary humans could not offer. The giants who took her in were motivated by genuine compassion, recognizing in the enormous child someone who needed protection and nurturing despite the danger she represented to everyone around her. Their warrior culture had taught them to value strength above all else, Yet even they struggled to comprehend the implications of caring for someone whose casual movements could accidentally destroy the things she was trying to protect. Mother Carmel's arrival in young Linlin's life appeared to be divine intervention, a holy woman whose reputation for caring for abandoned and unwanted children seemed perfectly suited to the unique challenges that the giant child presented. The nun's gentle manner and apparent genuine affection provided Linlin with the first taste of unconditional acceptance she had ever experienced. Someone who looked at her monstrous strength and impossible appetite and saw not a threat to be contained, but a child to be loved and guided toward understanding her place in the world. Under Carmel's influence, Linlin began to develop the first glimmers of the dream that would eventually consume her entire existence. The vision of a world where beings of all races could coexist in harmony regardless of their differences in size, strength, or appearance. The 6th birthday celebration that was meant to be the happiest day of Linlin's young life instead became the moment when her fundamental nature revealed itself in ways that could never be undone or forgotten. The semler that she consumed with such innocent enthusiasm carried within it consequences that no one present could have anticipated. The activation of powers that had been dormant within her massive frame, suddenly manifesting in ways that challenged every understanding of what devil fruits were supposed to be capable of accomplishing. The disappearance of Mother Carmel and the other children was not witnessed by anyone who survived to provide testimony, leaving Linlin alone, with memories that her young mind could not process, and powers that she did not understand she had acquired. The trauma of that birthday created fractures in her psyche that would never fully heal. Her inability to remember or understand what had happened to the people she loved most, creating a form of psychological damage that manifested as an eternal hunger for the acceptance and belonging that had been torn away from her in that moment. The Soru Soru no Mi powers that she had somehow obtained allowed her to manipulate souls and create life from inanimate objects, abilities that seemed tailor-made for someone whose deepest desire was to be surrounded by beings who could never abandon or disappoint her as humans inevitably did. Her growth into adulthood was marked by the gradual accumulation of power and influence, as her devil fruit abilities evolved to match her expanding understanding of what they could accomplish. The homies that she created from stolen soul fragments represented her attempt to build the family that had been destroyed on that traumatic birthday, anthropomorphic objects that possessed personality and apparent affection, but which remained fundamentally dependent on her continued existence and approval. These artificial beings could provide companionship and even a form of love, but they could never replace the genuine human connections that she craved, yet consistently destroyed through her inability to moderate her own strength and emotional responses. The Charlotte family that eventually formed around her was built upon the foundation of her biological fertility and her desperate need to create bonds that could not be easily broken by death or abandonment. Her 85 children represented not just a massive extended family, but a genetic experiment in creating beings who might possess sufficient strength and resilience to survive close contact with someone whose love was as dangerous as her hatred. Each child was both genuinely cherished and carefully evaluated for their potential utility in building the paradise she envisioned, their individual dreams and desires secondary to their role in fulfilling their mother's grand design for reshaping the world according to her vision of perfect harmony. The diversity of her children's abilities and appearances reflected her commitment to the ideal of racial equality that had been instilled in her during those brief happy years under Mother Carmel's guidance. Each union she formed with members of different species serving to demonstrate her belief that love could transcend any biological or cultural barrier. Yet the practical reality of managing such a large and diverse family required organizational structures that often contradicted the very ideals they were meant to serve. hierarchies based on strength and utility that inevitably created resentment among those who found themselves assigned roles that limited their personal freedom in service of their mother's greater vision. The three sweet commanders who emerged as the elite tier of her organization represented the pinnacle of what the Charlotte family could produce when genetic lottery and careful training combined to create individuals whose strength approached their mother's own legendary levels. Katakuri's mastery of observation haki reached heights that bordered on genuine precognition, his ability to perceive future events allowing him to maintain a perfect combat record that served as both inspiration and intimidation for his younger siblings. Smoothie's powers over liquids made her a living embodiment of her mother's appetite for consumption and absorption of others' essence. Cracker's biscuit soldiers provided him with seemingly unlimited reinforcements in battle while keeping his true body safely hidden from retaliation. Each commander brought unique capabilities to the family's military structure while embodying different aspects of their mother's complex personality and conflicted desires. They served as extensions of her will across territories too vast for even her overwhelming presence to monitor directly, enforcing the kind of order that made Totoland appear to be the paradise she claimed it to be, while ensuring that the darker necessities of maintaining such a system remained hidden from casual observation. Totoland itself represented the fullest expression of Big Mom's vision made manifest, a collection of islands where anthropomorphic objects created from stolen souls provided infrastructure and services that eliminated many of the practical barriers to peaceful coexistence between different species. The candy-based architecture was not mere whimsy, but a demonstration of her power to transform the basic building blocks of reality according to her will, creating an environment where the impossible became routine and the magical was simply another aspect of daily life. The rivers that flowed with different flavors, the mountains shaped like desserts, the weather systems that provided exactly the right conditions for each island's unique ecosystem. All of it served to prove that paradise was achievable when someone possessed sufficient power to impose their vision upon an unwilling world. Yet beneath the colorful surface of this artificial paradise lay the darker reality of what was required to maintain such an elaborate illusion of harmony. The souls that powered the homie population had to be harvested from somewhere, and the citizens of Totoland paid for their protection and prosperity through a form of taxation that literally consumed pieces of their life force. The monthly soul tribute that each resident was required to pay represented not just government revenue, but the raw material necessary to maintain the anthropomorphic society that made their paradise possible, creating a system where citizens were both beneficiaries and victims of their rulers' benevolent tyranny. The hunger pangs that periodically overwhelmed Big Mom's rational mind revealed the fundamental instability that lay at the heart of her entire empire, moments when her most basic psychological needs overwhelmed every other consideration and transformed her from protective mother into destructive force that recognized no distinction between friend and enemy. These episodes were not mere character flaws, but manifestations of the deep spiritual wounds that had never healed from her childhood trauma, the parts of her psyche that remained locked in that 5-year-old's desperate need for the comfort and security that had been torn away from her when she needed it most. During these fits, the careful order that normally governed Totoland collapsed into chaos, as her homie servants scrambled to either satisfy her cravings or flee from the devastation that would inevitably follow if the desired food could not be provided quickly enough. Islands could be destroyed, family members killed, years of careful planning undone, in moments when her damaged psyche regressed to its most primitive state and demanded immediate gratification regardless of the consequences. The terror that these episodes inspired in even her most loyal followers revealed how precarious the entire Charlotte Empire was, how dependent everything they had built was on maintaining the psychological stability of someone whose fundamental nature was defined by trauma, too deep to be healed through any amount of power or success. The wedding ceremony that was meant to solidify her alliance with the Vinsmoke family and provide her with access to their cloning technology represented the logical next step in her plan to create a truly integrated society where artificial and natural beings could coexist as equals. The union between Sanji and Pudding was not just a political marriage, but a symbolic demonstration of her belief that love could overcome any obstacle, that the paradise she envisioned was achievable through the simple expedient of forcing different groups to recognize their common interests and shared humanity. The assassination plot that unfolded during the ceremony revealed the extent to which her desire for control had corrupted her understanding of what genuine relationships required, her willingness to manipulate even her own daughter's memories and emotions in service of achieving her strategic objectives. The modifications she had made to Pudding's ability to edit memories represented the ultimate expression of her need to ensure that the people she loved would never voluntarily leave her, that the abandonment she had experienced as a child could be prevented through the simple expedient of removing any memories that might inspire thoughts of departure or betrayal. Yet, even as her plans crumbled around her during the chaotic battle that followed the wedding's disruption, moments of genuine humanity continued to shine through the layers of trauma and manipulation that had defined her adult life. Her reaction to the wedding cake that Sanji prepared revealed glimpses of the child who had once experienced pure joy in simple pleasures. Her tears upon tasting something that reminded her of happier times, serving as evidence that the capacity for genuine emotion had survived despite decades of using others' feelings as tools to be manipulated rather than experiences to be shared. The final battle at Wano that ended her reign as one of the four emperors was notable not just for the impressive display of power that Trafalgar Law and Eustace Kidd demonstrated in overcoming her seemingly impregnable defenses, but for the way it revealed the fundamental loneliness that had driven every aspect of her life and career. Her defeat came not through any particular weakness in her abilities, but through the accumulated weight of fighting alone against opponents who understood the value of genuine cooperation and mutual support. Her inability to form the kinds of authentic relationships that might have provided her with allies, rather than subordinates, ultimately proving to be her downfall. The fall of Charlotte Linlin marked the end of an era in which good intentions twisted by psychological damage could create empires that appeared benevolent from the outside while remaining fundamentally exploitative in their core operations. Her legacy would continue through her surviving children, some of whom had learned from her mistakes, while others remained trapped in the patterns of behavior that she had modeled throughout their upbringing. The paradise she had tried to create through force and manipulation would eventually crumble without her overwhelming presence to maintain its artificial harmony. Yet the dream that had inspired it, the vision of a world where differences in race and ability need not prevent peaceful coexistence, would survive to inspire others who might find healthier ways to pursue such noble goals. The tragedy of Big Mom was not that she failed to achieve her dreams, but that the very trauma that gave birth to those dreams also made it impossible for her to pursue them through methods that honored the values they were meant to represent. Her story served as a cautionary tale about how even the most admirable aspirations could become corrupted when pursued by someone whose understanding of love and loyalty had been permanently damaged by experiences too overwhelming for a young mind to process and integrate in healthy ways. Kaido emerged from the shadows of history like a force of nature given consciousness, a being whose very existence challenged every assumption about what it meant to be alive in a world where death was supposed to be the ultimate limitation. From his earliest days, he possessed a relationship with mortality that bordered on contempt, not because he feared it, but because it consistently refused his invitations to embrace him. The man who would become known as the King of Beasts carried within his seemingly indestructible frame a profound dissatisfaction with a world that had proven incapable of providing him with opponents worthy of his full strength, leaving him trapped in a form of existential loneliness that manifested as an obsession with finding someone capable of killing him. His childhood, shrouded in mystery and conflicting reports, appeared to have been marked by the kind of violence and abandonment that might have broken a lesser spirit, but instead forged his into something resembling tempered steel. The circumstances that led to his eventual consumption of the Uo Uo no Mi model, Seiryu, remained unclear, but the mythical Zoan fruit that granted him the ability to transform into an azure dragon seemed almost inevitable in retrospect, as if the world itself had conspired to provide him with a form that matched the legendary status he was destined to achieve through sheer force of will and overwhelming physical capability. The dragon form that became his most feared manifestation was not merely a larger, more powerful version of his human body, but a complete transformation that elevated him from the realm of exceptional individuals into something approaching natural disaster, given consciousness and purpose. His ability to generate flame hot enough to melt stone, to create tornadoes through the beating of his wings, to fly at speeds that made pursuit impossible for earthbound opponents, represented power that operated on scales typically reserved for geological events rather than individual combatants. Yet perhaps most terrifying of all was his hybrid form, which combined the raw elemental force of his dragon transformation with the tactical thinking and refined combat techniques that his human consciousness provided. The hobby that defined much of his adult life, the methodical pursuit of his own death through increasingly elaborate and dangerous suicide attempts, has revealed depths of psychological complexity that few who encountered him bothered to explore beyond their immediate terror at his destructive capabilities. His regular leaps from the floating island of Onigashima were not mere attention-seeking behaviors, but genuine experiments in discovering whether anything in the world possessed sufficient force to breach his seemingly impenetrable defenses. Each failed attempt at self-destruction only reinforced his growing conviction that he was fundamentally alone in his strength, trapped within a body that refused to grant him the release that death might provide from the burden of being too powerful for his own world to contain. The scars that marked his nearly indestructible hide told stories of battles that had pushed him closer to his desired goal of finding a worthy death. Yet even these wounds served primarily to demonstrate how far above normal combat scales he operated. The mark left by Kozuki Oden's blade was perhaps the most significant injury he had ever sustained, not just because of its physical impact, but because it represented the closest he had come to finding an opponent whose strength might have been capable of granting him the honorable death he craved. The fact that even Oden's legendary swordsmanship had ultimately proven insufficient to finish him served as both disappointment and confirmation that his search for a worthy end would need to continue. His mastery of all three forms of haki reached levels that few beings in the world could even comprehend, let alone match. His conqueror's haki was so overwhelming that its casual release could render entire armies unconscious without him having to lift a weapon. While his observation, haki allowed him to perceive threats and opportunities across vast distances with the kind of clarity that made surprise attacks effectively impossible. Most impressive of all was his application of advanced armament haki techniques, his ability to coat his attacks with invisible armor that could bypass conventional defenses, while protecting his own body from damage that would prove fatal to anyone else. The philosophy that guided his approach to leadership and conquest was built upon the simple premise that strength was the only quality that mattered in determining who deserved to survive and thrive in a world where weakness inevitably led to suffering and death. This belief was not born from casual cruelty, but from his own experiences in rising from obscurity to power. His understanding that compassion and mercy were luxuries that the weak could not afford and the strong did not need. In his view, the chaos and violence that characterized the world were not problems to be solved, but natural conditions that revealed truth about the fundamental nature of existence itself. The beast pirates that formed around this philosophy attracted individuals who shared his conviction that power was the ultimate virtue, creating an organization where strength determined not just rank and privilege, but the right to continued existence within the crew's hierarchy. His three all-stars, King, Queen, and Jack, each embodied different aspects of his approach to wielding overwhelming force, their ancient Zoan devil fruit powers, making them living representatives of prehistoric eras, when size and raw power determined survival more directly than in the modern world's more complex social structures. King the Wildfire carried within his Lunarian heritage the memory of races that had been exterminated by those who feared their natural advantages, his flames burning with temperatures that could incinerate opponents before they realized they were under attack. His loyalty to Kaido was not born from fear, but from recognition that here was someone whose strength was absolute enough to provide protection for the last survivor of a people who had been hunted to near extinction because their very existence challenged others' assumptions about what humans were supposed to be capable of achieving. Queen the Plague represented the marriage of scientific advancement with overwhelming physical power, his modifications of his own body demonstrating how technology could enhance natural ability when wielded by someone who understood that progress was meaningless unless it served to make the user more dangerous to their enemies. His viruses and mechanical enhancements were not separate from his combat abilities, but integrated aspects of a fighting style that recognized no distinction between fair and unfair tactics, only between effective and ineffective methods of eliminating opposition. Jack the Drought embodied the kind of relentless, destructive force that could reduce entire islands to barren wastelands through the simple application of sustained violence over extended periods. His mammoth transformation granted him the size and endurance necessary to level cities through brute force alone, while his willingness to continue fighting even when facing impossible odds demonstrated the kind of mindless determination that Kaido valued above intelligence or creativity in his subordinates. The Toby Roppo, who served as the next tier of his organization, represented ambitious individuals who had accepted his philosophy while harboring dreams of eventually advancing to positions that would grant them greater autonomy and respect within the crew's hierarchy. Their competitions for advancement created an internal dynamic that ensured only the strongest would rise to positions of real authority, while those who proved inadequate would be eliminated either through combat with their colleagues or through assignment to duties that would inevitably result in their deaths during missions too dangerous for more valuable crew members. The 20,000 subordinates who formed the bulk of his forces included both natural fighters drawn to his reputation and artificial devil fruit users, created through the smile fruits that his alliance with Doflamingo had provided. These artificial zoans were imperfect compared to genuine devil fruits, often granting only partial transformation abilities or creating psychological instabilities in their users, but they served Kaido's purposes by creating an army of enhanced soldiers whose strength exceeded normal human limitations, even if it fell short of what true devil fruit users could achieve. Wano country became the stage upon which Kaido's philosophy was tested against the traditions and values of a society that had once produced warriors capable of challenging even his overwhelming power. His alliance with the cowardly Orochi provided him with political cover for the industrial transformation he imposed upon the isolated nation, turning its natural beauty into a network of weapons factories that supplied his military ambitions while poisoning the land and water that had sustained its people for centuries. The suffering he inflicted upon Wano's citizens was not driven by personal malice, but by his genuine belief that hardship would either make them stronger or reveal their fundamental weakness and unsuitability for survival. The families torn apart by his policies, the samurai broken by his punishments, the children left orphaned by his war machine. All of this represented necessary culling in his understanding, the elimination of those too weak to adapt to the harsh realities that defined existence for anyone not protected by overwhelming personal power. The breaking of the legendary samurai who had served the Kazuki family demonstrated both his tactical understanding of how to destroy opposition and his philosophical commitment to proving that all traditional values were ultimately meaningless when confronted with sufficient force. Warriors who had built their identities around concepts of honor and duty found themselves faced with choices between maintaining their principles and protecting innocent people, discovering that their moral codes provided no guidance for situations where every available option led to tragedy for those they cared about most. His treatment of those who opposed him varied based on his assessment of their potential utility rather than any consistent moral framework, some enemies earning his respect through their strength while others were simply eliminated as obstacles to be removed. The prison labor camp, where he confined defeated opponents, served multiple purposes, extracting useful work from those too dangerous to release, while providing him with a steady supply of potential recruits among those who might eventually accept his worldview after experiencing the alternatives he offered to continued resistance. The artificial devil fruit production that formed a cornerstone of his military strategy represented his understanding that individual strength, however overwhelming, was insufficient for conquering territories as vast as those he intended to control. The Smile Factory hidden beneath Wano transformed the nation's agricultural output into weapons that could create enhanced soldiers, turning the country's traditional strength, its ability to feed large populations, into the foundation for an army that could potentially challenge the world government itself. His ultimate goal was not mere conquest, but the creation of a worldwide conflict that would shatter existing power structures and replace them with a new order where only those capable of defending their positions through personal combat would be permitted to hold authority over others. The war he envisioned would eliminate the artificial hierarchies that allowed the weak to command the strong, replacing political and economic power with the kind of direct physical dominance that he understood and respected. The arrival of the worst generation pirates in his territory provided him with the first genuine excitement he had experienced in years. The possibility that these newcomers might possess sufficient strength or cleverness to provide him with the challenging battles he had been seeking throughout his long career. His decision to temporarily ally with Big Mom was motivated not by strategic necessity, but by curiosity about whether their combined strength might attract opponents capable of pushing both of them beyond their previous limitations. The festival of fire and chaos that erupted during the final battle for Wano's future saw Kaido facing not just individual opponents, but the combined will of an entire nation that had finally found the courage to reject his philosophy of strength-based hierarchy in favor of older values that emphasized protection of the weak and preservation of beauty in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything worth cherishing. Monkey D. Luffy's growth throughout their extended battle represented everything that Kaido had claimed was impossible. The transformation of someone whose strength had been insufficient into someone whose power exceeded even his own legendary capabilities The awakening of the Hito Hito no Mi model, Nika, during their final confrontation, revealed forces that operated according to rules that transcended even Kaido's understanding of what devil fruits were supposed to be capable of achieving. The defeat that finally granted him something approaching the worthy end he had sought for so long came not through the overwhelming application of superior force, but through the manifestation of joy itself as a combat technique. Luffy's Gear 5th transformation, creating possibilities that existed outside the grim worldview that had defined Kaido's entire approach to existence. His fall into the magma beneath Wano marked not just the end of his reign, but the collapse of a philosophy that had seemed unassailable until confronted with someone whose strength was built upon protecting others rather than dominating them. The liberation of Wano that followed his defeat demonstrated the ultimate inadequacy of his belief system. As a nation that he had considered permanently broken by his policies proved capable of rapid recovery once freed from the oppressive systems he had imposed upon it. The joy that erupted across the country as news of his downfall spread revealed reserves of resilience and hope that his philosophy had claimed were impossible to maintain in the face of overwhelming force consistently applied over extended periods. His legacy would endure, not in the empire he had built, but in the lessons his defeat provided about the limitations of power that served only itself, the demonstration that even the strongest creature in the world could be overcome by someone whose strength was amplified by the support of others, rather than isolated by the conviction that cooperation was a form of weakness that real warriors could not afford to indulge. Akagami, no Shanks, entered the world stage, not with the thunderous proclamations that typically announced the rise of future emperors, but with a quiet confidence that spoke to depths of power and wisdom that few could perceive until they found themselves standing in his presence. The red hair that gave him his epithet seemed almost incidental compared to the aura of absolute certainty that surrounded him, the sense that here was someone who had seen the true shape of the world's hidden mechanisms and had chosen his path with full knowledge of what such choices would ultimately cost. His ascension to the rank of emperor at an age when most pirates were still struggling to survive their first encounters with the Grand Line's more dangerous inhabitants represented not just exceptional individual ability, but a fundamental understanding of how power operated in the complex ecosystem of the New World. While his contemporaries focused on accumulating territory, building massive fleets, or developing increasingly destructive devil fruit abilities, Shanks seemed to grasp that true influence came from positioning oneself at the intersection of various forces rather than attempting to dominate them through simple applications of overwhelming strength. The mystery surrounding his origins had become legend in its own right, whispered speculations that connected him to the God Valley incident, and suggested bloodlines that might explain his unprecedented access to the world government's most powerful figures. The baby that Goldie, Roger had discovered during that chaotic battle between Marines, pirates, and celestial dragons, had grown into a man whose very existence seemed to bridge worlds that were supposed to remain forever separate. His ability to move freely between the realms of piracy and global politics, defying every established understanding of how such relationships were supposed to function. His years aboard the Oro Jackson as a member of the Pirate King's crew provided him with insights into the true history of the world that few living people possessed, knowledge that shaped his understanding not just of what was possible, but of what was necessary to prevent the kinds of catastrophes that could result from the wrong people gaining access to the wrong information at the wrong time. The experience of witnessing Roger's discovery of the truth about the Void Century and the decision to surrender himself rather than act upon that knowledge had profound implications for how Shanks would eventually choose to wield his own considerable influence. The loss of his arm to save Luffy represented far more than a simple act of heroism or even calculated investment in a promising young pirate's future development. The sacrifice of his dominant limb, which should have significantly reduced his combat effectiveness, somehow seemed to enhance rather than diminish his reputation as one of the world's most dangerous individuals. This paradox suggested that his true strength had never been dependent on physical capabilities alone, but drew from sources that operated according to principles that transcended normal understanding of how power was supposed to function. The Red Hair pirates that formed around his leadership embodied a completely different approach to crew organization than any of the other Emperor factions. Their relatively small numbers more than compensated for by the exceptional quality of each individual member. Unlike other emperors who maintained their positions through vast hierarchies of subordinates and allied crews, Shanks seemed to prefer working with a tight-knit group of individuals whose abilities complemented his own in ways that created collective capabilities far exceeding what their modest numbers might suggest. Ben Beckman's role as his first mate represented the perfect synthesis of intellectual brilliance and combat prowess. His strategic thinking, providing the analytical foundation that allowed Shanks to pursue objectives that operated on timescales and complexity levels that would have been impossible for someone relying solely on instinct and personal charisma. The respect that even Marine admirals showed for Beckman's capabilities spoke to reputation earned through consistent demonstration that his calculations could predict and influence events in ways that made him nearly as dangerous as his captain. Despite lacking any devil fruit powers or legendary bloodline, Lucky Roo's seemingly casual demeanor concealed reflexes and tactical awareness that had been honed through decades of operating alongside individuals whose lives depended on split-second decisions made under the most extreme possible circumstances. His ability to eliminate threats before they fully manifested demonstrated the kind of preemptive thinking that characterized the entire crew's approach to handling dangerous situations, their preference for preventing problems rather than simply responding to them after they had already created chaos and casualties. Yasop's marksmanship represented mastery of long-range combat that bordered on the supernatural. His ability to place shots exactly where they needed to be from distances that should have made accurate targeting impossible, suggesting either devil fruit enhancement or natural talent that existed at the very limits of what human beings were supposed to be capable of achieving. His presence in the crew provided them with capabilities that could influence battles before enemies even realized they were under attack. His rifle serving as extension of Shanks's will across distances that conventional combat could never bridge. The balanced composition of the Red Hair pirates reflected Shanks's understanding that true strength came from the harmonious integration of different capabilities rather than the simple accumulation of individuals who possessed similar types of power. Each crew member brought unique skills that filled gaps in their collective abilities while maintaining personal excellence that would have made them formidable opponents, even as individuals operating outside the support structure that Shanks had created around them. The territories that flew his flag received a different kind of protection than what other emperors typically provided, his approach emphasizing prevention of conflicts rather than overwhelming retaliation against those who caused problems. Islands under his protection rarely experienced the kinds of devastating battles that periodically ravaged territories claimed by other emperors, not because potential attackers feared his strength less, but because they understood that challenging his interests would bring consequences that operated according to rules they could not predict or prepare for effectively. His reputation as a peacekeeper among the emperors was built upon his unique ability to intervene in conflicts at precisely the right moment to prevent escalation while avoiding the appearance of taking sides in ways that might create lasting enmities. The arrival of his ship at Marineford had been sufficient to immediately end the paramount war. Both the Marines and the remaining Whitebeard pirates, recognizing that continued fighting in his presence would likely produce outcomes that served no one's interests, while potentially creating new problems that could destabilize the Pace's Empire system. The respect he commanded from the five elders represented perhaps the most remarkable aspect of his position in the world's power structure, his ability to enter Mariehui and conduct private meetings with the world government's highest-ranking officials, suggesting connections and agreements that operated far beyond the normal boundaries of pirate government relations. The casual manner in which these interactions occurred implied relationships built over extended periods through negotiations and understandings that remained hidden from public knowledge, yet clearly shaped major policy decisions on both sides. His knowledge of the true history contained within the poneglyphs, and his decision to refrain from acting upon that information, despite possessing the strength necessary to do so, revealed depths of wisdom and restraint that set him apart from every other individual capable of reaching Laughtale and claiming the One Piece for himself. The choice to allow another generation to discover these truths in their own time, rather than imposing his own interpretation of what such knowledge demanded, suggested either remarkable patience or understanding of temporal factors that operated on scales beyond normal human comprehension. The straw hat that he had entrusted to Luffy carried significance that extended far beyond its value as a simple gift or token of encouragement. Its history connecting the current era's most promising young pirate to the legacy of the previous pirate king, while creating symbolic bridges between past and future that transcended any individual's personal ambitions or désir. The promise implicit in that transfer, that Luffy would eventually grow into someone worthy of surpassing even Shanks himself, represented faith in the new generation's potential that few adults possessed when confronted with the apparent impossibility of their own successors exceeding their achievements. His mastery of Haki reached levels that seemed to operate according to principles that transcended normal understanding of how spiritual energy was supposed to function. His Conqueror's Haki so refined that it could disable observation Haki users' ability to perceive future events, while simultaneously communicating complex messages to those capable of interpreting the subtle variations in its application. The wireless transmission of his presence across vast distances created tactical advantages that allowed him to influence battles without physically participating in them. His reputation alone serving as weapon, capable of altering the calculations that opponents used when deciding whether to initiate conflicts. His swordsmanship, developed through countless duels with Dracul Mihawk before the loss of his arm, represented the kind of refined technique that elevated combat into art form, while maintaining the deadly efficiency that characterized all truly great warriors. The fact that the world's greatest swordsmen had ceased their duels only after Shanks's sacrifice, rather than because either had definitively proven superior, suggested that their rivalry had transcended simple competition to become mutual recognition of excellence that could not be adequately measured through conventional victory and defeat. The decision to finally pursue the One Piece after years of apparent disinterest in claiming the ultimate treasure represented either response to specific developments in the world's political situation, or recognition that the time for subtle influence and behind-the-scenes manipulation had passed, requiring more direct action to achieve whatever objectives had been guiding his long-term strategy. His declaration of intent to enter the race for Laughtale created immediate shifts in how other powers assessed their own positions and plans. The knowledge that someone of his capabilities was no longer content to remain on the sidelines, forcing reassessment of assumptions that had shaped policy for over a decade. The coming confrontation with Luffy, implied by his change in approach to pursuing the Pirate King title, represented more than simple rivalry between current and aspiring emperors, but the fulfillment of promises made years earlier, when a young boy had declared impossible dreams with absolute conviction despite lacking any apparent means of achieving them. The straw hat that had connected them across the years would finally return to its original owner through contest that would determine not just who possessed superior strength, but who had developed the wisdom necessary to handle the prostin responsibilities that came with claiming Roger's legacy, the secrets that Shanks carried about the world's true history, the will of D, and the ancient weapons remained carefully guarded, even as events moved toward culmination that would likely require their revelation, his understanding of when and how such knowledge should be shared, representing perhaps his greatest contribution to the world's eventual transformation. The balance he had maintained between action and restraint, between intervention and allowing natural development to proceed, suggested strategic thinking that operated on timescales measured in decades, rather than the immediate tactical considerations that drove most powerful individuals' decision-making processes. His legacy, regardless of how his story ultimately concluded, would be measured not just by the battles he won or the territory he controlled, but by his demonstration that true power could be exercised through wisdom and restraint rather than simple domination. That the strongest individuals were those who understood when not to use their strength, rather than those who applied it without consideration for long-term consequences. The example he provided of leadership that served larger purposes while maintaining personal honor would influence generations of pirates who came after him, proving that it was possible to achieve legendary status while remaining true to principles that transcended mere self-interest. The red-haired emperor who had shaped the world through careful intervention and strategic patience now prepared for the final chapter of his story. His decision to actively pursue the One Piece, marking the end of an era defined by stability, maintained through balance, and the beginning of whatever would emerge from the collision of the greatest powers the world had ever seen, converging on the same ultimate objective for the first time in decades. Marshal D. Teach emerged from the shadows of history, not as the sudden force of destruction, but as the patient architect of chaos, someone whose understanding of power's true mechanisms was matched only by his willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone in service of ambitions that operated on timescales measured in decades rather than the immediate gratification that drove most pirates toward their inevitable destruction. The man who would become known as Blackbeard possessed a strategic mind capable of planning elaborate schemes that required years to mature while maintaining the discipline necessary to remain hidden among his enemies until the perfect moment arrived to reveal his true nature and claim the rewards that his patience had earned. His decades aboard the Moby Dick as a seemingly ordinary member of the Whitebeard Pirates represented perhaps the most remarkable feat of sustained deception in recorded pirate history. His ability to conceal his ambitions and capabilities while living in close proximity to individuals whose observation haki should have been capable of detecting any significant duplicity or hidden malice. The fact that he could maintain such an elaborate facade while serving under someone whose entire philosophy was built upon the sanctity of family bonds spoke to psychological compartmentalization abilities that bordered on the pathological, his capacity to genuinely care for his crewmates, while simultaneously planning their eventual betrayal, suggesting a mind capable of holding contradictory truths without experiencing the cognitive dissonance that would have destroyed lesser individuals. The murder of Thatch represented far more than simple treachery motivated by greed for the devil fruit that his division commander had discovered. Though the Yami Yami no Mi, the that Teach claimed through that act of ultimate betrayal would indeed prove to be the cornerstone upon which his entire subsequent rise to power was built. The killing of someone who had considered him a brother violated every principle that held the Whitebeard pirates together, while simultaneously demonstrating that Teach understood those principles well enough to exploit the predictable responses that such violation would generate from those who remained loyal to their captain's ideals. The dark fruit that he had waited decades to obtain represented not just enhanced combat capabilities, but the key to abilities that no other devil fruit user in recorded history had ever possessed. Its unique properties, allowing him to nullify other devil fruit powers through direct contact, while somehow enabling his body to accommodate multiple fruits without experiencing the fatal rejection that such combinations typically produced. The darkness that he could generate and control was not mere absence of light, but something approaching antimatter, given consciousness, capable of absorbing not just physical attacks and devil fruit abilities, but potentially entire islands if he chose to unleash its full destructive potential. His plan to use Ace as bait to draw Whitebeard into a trap that would result in the old Emperor's death revealed strategic thinking that incorporated not just tactical considerations, but deep psychological insight into how the bonds between father and son could be weaponized against those who valued such relationships above their own safety. The capture of Port Gas D, Ace required him to overcome someone whose Mera no Mi abilities should have provided overwhelming advantages in direct combat, yet Teach's victory demonstrated that superior planning and willingness to accept significant personal risk could triumph over raw power when applied with sufficient intelligence and determination. The decision to deliver Ace to the world government rather than killing him immediately served multiple purposes that revealed the complexity of Teach's long-term strategy. His understanding that the public execution of the Pirate King's son would inevitably draw Whitebeard into a battle that the old Emperor could not win, despite his legendary strength. The position of warlord that he gained through this betrayal provided him with temporary protection from marine pursuit, while giving him access to resources and information that would prove crucial for the next phase of his plan to claim Whitebeard's position among the four emperors. His appearance at Marineford during the war's climax represented the culmination of years of careful preparation, his timing so precise that he arrived just as Whitebeard's condition had deteriorated sufficiently to make him vulnerable to someone who understood exactly where and how to strike to achieve maximum damage. The confrontation between the world's strongest man and his former subordinate carried emotional weight that transcended simple combat, representing the collision between someone who had built his entire identity around protecting his family and someone who had destroyed that family from within for personal gain. The mysterious method by which Teach extracted Whitebeard's devil fruit power upon the old Emperor's death remained one of the most closely guarded secrets in his possession. His ability to steal and integrate the Gura no Mi's earthquake-generating capabilities, suggesting either unprecedented understanding of how devil fruits functioned or access to knowledge that had been deliberately hidden from the world by those who feared what such information might enable in the wrong hands. The sight of him wielding both darkness and earthquake powers simultaneously sent shockwaves throughout the assembled forces that extended far beyond the physical destruction his attacks caused. His recruitment strategy following his elevation to Emperor status focused on gathering individuals whose moral flexibility matched their exceptional combat abilities. His understanding that the most dangerous subordinates were often those who had been abandoned or betrayed by more conventional organizations that demanded loyalty without offering corresponding protection or advancement opportunities, The prison break at Impel Down provided him with access to criminals whose strength had been proven through their ability to survive in the world's most secure detention facility. Their willingness to join his crew, reflecting not just desire for freedom, but recognition that his unconventional approach to leadership might offer opportunities that traditional pirate hierarchies would never provide. Jesus Burgess brought to his crew the kind of raw physical power that could serve as battering ram against obstacles that required straightforward destruction rather than subtle manipulation. His championship wrestling background, providing him with grappling techniques that could neutralize opponents whose devil fruit abilities made them dangerous at range, while his unwavering loyalty to teach reflected genuine admiration for someone whose rise to power had demonstrated that patience and intelligence could triumph over seemingly impossible odds. Van Auger's marksmanship abilities operated on scales that made him valuable not just as combatant but as intelligence gatherer. His capacity to place shots across distances measured in miles, allowing the crew to influence events without revealing their presence, while his philosophical musings about fate and destiny suggested understanding of forces that operated beyond simple cause and effect relationships that governed most people's understanding of how the world functioned. Doc Q's medical knowledge provided the crew with capabilities that went far beyond simple healing. His expertise in poisons and diseases, making him capable of eliminating targets through methods that left no evidence of foul play, while his seemingly fragile constitution concealed reserves of strength that had been developed through years of studying how the human body could be pushed beyond its normal limitations through careful application of various chemical enhancements. Lafitte's background in law enforcement had provided him with insights into how government organizations operated that proved invaluable when planning operations that required circumventing official security measures. His hypnotic abilities, allowing him to gather intelligence and plant suggestions in ways that made their targets believe they were acting according to their own judgment rather than external manipulation. The addition of former Impel Down prisoners to his crew brought capabilities that reflected the kind of desperation and ingenuity that extended incarceration in impossible conditions could foster in those strong enough to survive such experiences. Katarina Devon's Inu Inu no Mi model, Kyubi no Kitsune, provided the crew with infiltration capabilities that operated through perfect physical mimicry rather than simple disguise. Her ability to assume the exact appearance of anyone she had touched, creating opportunities for deception that could compromise even the most secure organizations. San Juan Wolf's massive size made him valuable not just as weapon but as mobile fortress. His ability to transport the entire crew while providing them with elevated firing positions and protection from smaller opponents, demonstrating how physical advantages could be leveraged in ways that transcended simple combat applications. Vasco Shot's alcohol-based attacks provided area denial capabilities that could clear battlefields of weaker opponents, while his seemingly perpetual intoxication concealed tactical awareness that had been sharpened through years of functioning effectively despite his apparent impairment. Avalo Pizarro's territorial ambitions complemented Teach's own goals, while providing the crew with someone whose understanding of governance and administration could handle the practical details of managing conquered territories. His Shima Shima no Mi abilities, allowing him to literally become islands while transforming their geography according to strategic necessities. The recruitment of Shiryu represented perhaps Teach's greatest coup in terms of acquiring subordinates whose abilities directly enhanced his own strategic options. The former head jailer's mastery of swordsmanship, combined with his Suke Suke no Mi invisibility powers, creating assassination capabilities that could eliminate targets regardless of their personal strength or security measures. The corruption that had led to Shiryu's imprisonment demonstrated moral flexibility that made him ideal for operations that required actions that more principled individuals might hesitate to undertake. The payback war that followed Whitebeard's death provided Teach with the opportunity to demonstrate that his elevation to emperor status was based on genuine capability rather than opportunistic timing. His defeat of the remaining Whitebeard pirates, proving that he could overcome opponents who fought with the desperation that came from seeking to avenge their beloved father figure. The victory that secured his position among the four emperors was achieved not through overwhelming individual strength, but through superior coordination and tactical flexibility that allowed his crew to exploit the emotional vulnerability that grief had created in their enemies. His knowledge of the will of D that connected him to figures like Gold D, Roger, Monkey D, Luffy, and Portgas D. Ace suggested access to information about ancient history and destiny that went far beyond what most people understood, about the mysterious middle initial that appeared in certain bloodlines. The confidence with which he had executed his plan to claim Whitebeard's position implied understanding of historical patterns and forces that operated on scales measured in centuries rather than the immediate tactical considerations that guided most pirates' decision-making processes. The territories that came under his control, following his victory over the Whitebeard pirates, reflected his understanding that true power required not just the ability to conquer, but the administrative capabilities necessary to extract value from conquered resources while maintaining sufficient security to prevent other ambitious individuals from attempting to claim what he had won. His approach to governance differed significantly from other emperors, his willingness to employ methods that more traditional leaders would consider beneath their dignity, suggesting pragmatic understanding that effective control required adaptability rather than adherence to conventional standards of honorable behavior. His continued pursuit of devil fruit users whose abilities could enhance his crew's collective capabilities demonstrated long-term thinking that went beyond simple accumulation of individual power. His understanding that the coming conflicts would require capabilities that no single person could provide, regardless of their personal strength or intelligence. The network of informants and allies that he had developed during his years of patient planning provided him with intelligence-gathering capabilities that rivaled those of the world government itself. His ability to predict and respond to changing circumstances, reflecting preparation that had begun long before his true ambitions became apparent to his enemies. The mystery surrounding his body's unique ability to accommodate multiple devil fruits remained one of his most closely guarded secrets. His understanding of whatever principles or procedures enabled such unprecedented feats, suggesting either access to ancient knowledge that had been lost to the world or physiological anomalies that set him apart from normal human beings in ways that went far beyond his exceptional ambition and strategic capabilities. His role as bearer of the will of D carried implications that extended far beyond his personal ambitions to encompass whatever destiny awaited those who carried that mysterious inheritance. His actions serving not just his own interests, but potentially fulfilling prophecies or historical patterns that had been set in motion centuries before his birth. The confidence with which he moved toward whatever final confrontation awaited him suggested either complete faith in his own abilities or knowledge of forces that would ensure his ultimate victory, regardless of the opposition he might encounter. The empire that Blackbeard had built through patience, deception, and strategic brutality represented a completely different approach to wielding emperor-level power than any of his contemporaries had demonstrated. His willingness to employ methods that others considered dishonorable or dangerous creating capabilities that operated outside the established rules that had governed interactions between the world's most powerful individuals for decades. His legacy, regardless of how his story ultimately concluded, would be measured not just by the territory he controlled or the enemies he defeated, but by his demonstration that even the most elaborate systems of honor and tradition could be overcome by someone who possessed sufficient intelligence, determination, and moral flexibility to exploit their inherent weaknesses without regard for the collateral damage such exploitation might cause. The emergence of new emperors in the wake of the Wano country liberation marked not just a reshuffling of individual power, but a fundamental transformation in how imperial authority could be conceived, claimed, and exercised in a world where the old certainties had been shattered by events that proved even the mightiest could fall when confronted by forces that operated according to principles they had never bothered to understand. The vacuum created by the simultaneous defeat of Big Mom and Kaido created opportunities for ascension that would have been impossible under the previous system's careful balance, opening pathways to power for individuals whose approaches to leadership differed so dramatically from their predecessors that their very existence challenged every assumption about what it meant to rule over territories in the new world. Monkey D. Luffy's recognition as the fifth emperor represented perhaps the most radical departure from established patterns of imperial succession. His elevation achieved not through the methodical accumulation of territory and subordinates that had characterized previous ascensions, but through a series of actions that demonstrated his commitment to principles that transcended personal ambition or even crew loyalty. The defeat of Kaido that secured his position was notable not just for the overwhelming display of power it required, but for the way it was achieved through awakening abilities that seemed to operate according to rules that had been forgotten by the world, the manifestation of joy itself as a combat technique, suggesting connections to forces that predated the current age's understanding of what devil fruits were supposed to be capable of accomplishing. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet that formed around Luffy's inspiration represented a completely different model of imperial organization. 7 crews totaling over 5,000 individuals who had pledged their loyalty not through negotiated agreements or conquered submission, but through genuine admiration for someone whose actions had consistently demonstrated that strength could be used to protect rather than dominate those who possessed less power. The sake ceremony that formalized their alliance had been initiated by his subordinates rather than demanded by him, reflecting his fundamental discomfort with traditional hierarchies and his preference for relationships based on mutual respect rather than formal chains of command. The territories that had declared themselves under Luffy's protection did so not because he had conquered them or demanded tribute, but because his interventions on their behalf had demonstrated that his strength served purposes larger than personal aggrandizement, his willingness to risk everything for people he barely knew, creating bonds of gratitude and respect that proved more durable than alliances built on fear or economic dependence. Fishman Island's declaration of allegiance marked the first time in centuries that an entire kingdom had voluntarily placed itself under pirate protection, their decision reflecting recognition that Luffy's approach to wielding power offered better prospects for their people's welfare than continued reliance on world government protection that had proven inadequate when they needed to it most. The philosophical approach that distinguished Luffy's leadership from that of previous emperors was built upon his fundamental belief that freedom was meaningless unless it was shared, that individual strength was valuable only insofar as it enabled the protection of those who lacked the power to protect themselves. His reluctance to accept formal recognition as an emperor reflected not false modesty, but genuine understanding that titles and hierarchies could become barriers to the kinds of authentic relationships that had sustained him throughout his journey from East Blue rookie to New World legend. His crew's individual growth during their separation and reunion demonstrated how his influence could inspire others to transcend their previous limitations, not through pressure or competition, but through the simple knowledge that someone believed in their potential strongly enough to entrust them with responsibilities that matched their dreams, rather than merely their demonstrated capabilities. Zoro's development into someone approaching the world's greatest swordsman reflected not just technical improvement, but deepening understanding of what it meant to support a captain whose ambitions were large enough to encompass everyone's dreams within their scope. Sanji's reconciliation with his family heritage and his embrace of scientific enhancements that he had previously rejected demonstrated how Luffy's acceptance could enable others to integrate aspects of their identity that they had considered incompatible with their chosen values. His ability to remain true to his principles while acknowledging the practical advantages that his bloodline provided, reflecting growth that would have been impossible without the security of knowing that his worth to his crew was not dependent on maintaining any particular image or set of capabilities. The revolutionary implications of Luffy's approach to imperial power extended far beyond his immediate territories to influence how other pirates and even government officials thought about the relationship between strength, responsibility, his consistent demonstration that overwhelming power could be wielded without corruption, inspiring others to reconsider assumptions about the inevitable relationship between authority and moral compromise that had shaped political thinking for centuries. Buggy the Star Clown's elevation to emperor status represented perhaps the most unlikely ascension in the history of piracy. His recognition as one of the 4 emperors achieved, not through personal strength or strategic brilliance, but through a combination of mistaken identity, convenient timing, and the backing of individuals whose own capabilities far exceeded his, but who found it advantageous to allow him to serve as their public face. The formation of Cross-Guild around his nominal leadership demonstrated how reputation and perception could sometimes matter more than actual ability when it came to achieving positions that seemed to require overwhelming personal power. The organization that emerged from the marriage of Buggy's existing network with Dracul Mihawk's legendary status and Sir Crocodile's strategic acumen created something entirely new in the ecosystem of New World power. Structures, a bounty hunting organization that targeted Marines rather than pirates, and thereby inverted one of the fundamental assumptions that had governed law enforcement in the pirate age. The psychological impact of their bounty system on marine operations went far beyond the immediate tactical advantages it provided, creating hesitation and second-guessing among government forces, who suddenly found themselves hunted with the same systematic approach they had traditionally applied to their targets. Mihawk's participation in Cross-Guild reflected his pragmatic understanding that the dissolution of the warlord system had left him in need of protection that individual strength alone could not provide. His legendary swordsmanship, insufficient to guarantee security against the combined forces that the world government could bring to bear against isolated targets, who lacked the political connections or organizational backing that could Binu Sanzit deter such overwhelming responses. His willingness to operate under Buggy's nominal command demonstrated the kind of calculated humility that only someone truly secure in their own abilities could afford to display. Crocodile's involvement in the organization represented his return to prominence after years of relative obscurity following his defeat in Alabasta. His strategic mind-finding in Cross-Guild, the vehicle through which his ambitions for reshaping the world's power structures could be pursued through methods more subtle than the direct conquest he had previously attempted, His understanding of how to manipulate public perception and coordinate complex operations provided the organizational backbone that transformed what might have been a mere publicity stunt into a genuine threat to established order. The convenience that had placed Buggy at the head of their bounty poster proved to be serendipitous beyond what any of them could have anticipated. His natural charisma and ability to inspire loyalty among followers who should have been able to see through his obvious limitations, creating genuine value that complemented his partner's more conventional forms of power. His role as figurehead allowed Mihawk and Crocodile to operate with reduced scrutiny while providing him with protection and resources that elevated his actual capabilities far beyond what his individual strength would have suggested possible. The territories that came under Cross Guild's influence experienced a different kind of order than what other Emperor organizations typically provided. Their focus on hunting Marines, creating safe havens for pirates and criminals, while simultaneously disrupting government operations in ways that benefited ordinary citizens who had suffered under oppressive official policies. The inversion of traditional law enforcement relationships created spaces where alternative forms of governance could emerge, demonstrating that effective organization did not require the moral authority that governments claimed as their exclusive province. The bounty system that became Cross Guild's signature innovation represented more than clever psychological warfare against their marine targets, creating economic incentives that encouraged widespread participation in anti-government activities while providing clear metrics for measuring success that could motivate continued engagement from allies who might otherwise lose interest when immediate rewards were not apparent. The transformation of marine hunting from scattered individual acts of revenge into systematic, organized campaign demonstrated how proper coordination could amplify individual grievances into collective action capable of challenging institutional power. The impact that these new emperors had on the established balance of power in the New World extended far beyond their immediate territories and operations, to influence how every other faction calculated their strategic options and long-term objectives, their different approaches to wielding imperial authority, creating possibilities and precedents that older organizations would need to account for when planning their own future actions. The world government's response to these developments reflected recognition that the Emperor system itself was evolving in directions that their traditional containment strategies might prove inadequate to address. The philosophical diversity that these new emperors represented challenged the assumption that there were only limited ways to successfully wield the kind of power that imperial status required. Their demonstration that entirely different approaches to organization, motivation, and governance could achieve comparable results, opening possibilities for future leaders who might choose to pursue power through methods that had never been attempted on such scales before. The territories, crews, and allied organizations that had aligned themselves with these new emperors reflected not just opportunistic adaptation to changing circumstances, but genuine attraction to leadership styles that offered alternatives to the fear-based hierarchies that had traditionally characterized the most powerful pirate organizations. Their willingness to commit their resources and loyalty to such experimental approaches, suggesting widespread dissatisfaction with conventional models of how strength and authority were supposed to interact. The ultimate test of whether these new approaches to imperial power would prove sustainable would come through their ability to maintain their positions when confronted by the kinds of challenges that had shaped their predecessors. Understanding of what methods were necessary for long-term survival in the New World's unforgiving environment, their success or failure determining whether the Emperor system itself would continue to evolve toward greater diversity or eventually revert to the more traditional patterns that had characterized it for decades before their ascension to power The geography of imperial power in the New World resembled less a conventional map divided by clear borders, and more a living tapestry where influence ebbed and flowed according to the complex interplay of personal relationships, economic interests, and the ever-shifting balance of strength that determined who could enforce their will upon territories that existed far beyond the reach of traditional governmental authority. The islands that comprised each emperor's domain were connected not by proximity or shared culture, but by webs of loyalty and protection that stretched across vast oceanic distances, creating empires that operated according to principles fundamentally different from the terrestrial nations that most people understood as the basic building blocks of political organization. The strongholds that served as the centers of imperial power were chosen not merely for their strategic military value, but for their symbolic significance and their ability to project the particular vision of order that each emperor sought to impose upon their corner of the chaotic New World. Onigashima's skull-shaped fortress had embodied Kaido's philosophy that strength was the only virtue worth respecting, its ominous appearance serving as constant reminder to visitors and subjects alike that they existed within the domain of someone whose power could end their lives with casual ease if they failed to demonstrate the kind of submission that his worldview demanded from all lesser beings. Whole Cake Island's fantastical architecture of candy and dessert had reflected Big Mom's twisted dream of creating a paradise where all races could coexist in harmony, the anthropomorphic buildings and singing plants providing constant evidence of her ability to breathe life into inanimate objects, while simultaneously demonstrating the artificial nature of the happiness that such manipulation could produce. The very landscape served as extension of her will, every surface and structure infused with pieces of souls that had been extracted from those who lived within her territory, creating an environment where the boundary between natural and supernatural became meaningless. The territories that flew under each emperor's protection experienced forms of governance that varied dramatically, depending on their ruler's personal philosophy and approach to maintaining order across domains too vast for any individual to monitor directly. Islands under Whitebeard's flag had enjoyed perhaps the most benevolent form of imperial rule, his paternal approach to leadership, creating relationships based on genuine care for his subjects' well-being rather than simple exploitation of their resources for his own benefit. The protection he offered was not conditional on tribute or absolute obedience, but flowed from his fundamental belief that strength existed to shield the weak from those who would prey upon their vulnerability. The economic systems that developed within each emperor's sphere of influence reflected their individual priorities and understanding of how power could be most effectively maintained over extended periods. Big Mom's soul tribute system had created a form of taxation that literally consumed pieces of her subjects' life force, yet many citizens had considered this an acceptable price for the security and prosperity that membership in her artificial paradise provided. The monthly payments of lifespan had been structured to be sustainable for healthy adults, while ensuring that the Homie population remained adequately powered to maintain the infrastructure and services that made Totoland function as a self-contained civilization. Kaido's industrial transformation of Wano had demonstrated how an emperor's vision could completely reshape a nation's economy and culture within remarkably short time frames, his weapons factories converting the country's agricultural abundance into instruments of war, while poisoning the very resources that had sustained its people for centuries. The forced labor camps that powered his production facilities had operated according to principles of pure efficiency, extracting maximum value from human resources without regard for the long-term consequences of such exploitation on either the workers or the broader society they had once served. The protection racket system that characterized most emperor territories operated according to unwritten rules that balanced the benefits of security against the costs of submission to authority that brooked no meaningful challenge or dissent. Islands that accepted an emperor's flag gained access to trade networks, dispute resolution services, and most importantly, immunity from raids by lesser pirates who lacked the strength or courage to challenge someone whose retaliation could manifest as literal natural disasters. The price of such protection varied depending on the territory's strategic value, resource wealth, and the particular emperor's assessment of how much tribute they could extract without creating resentment that might eventually manifest as rebellion or defection to rival organizations. The contested zones that existed at the boundaries between different emperors' spheres of influence became laboratories for testing the relative strength and determination of opposing factions without triggering the kind of direct confrontation between emperors themselves that could destabilize the entire New World balance of power. These disputed territories often changed hands multiple times, as subordinate crews tested their strength against each other, their victories and defeats serving as proxies for the larger conflicts that their leaders were too pragmatic to pursue directly, given the mutually assured destruction that such battles would likely produce. The neutral zones that persisted despite the pressure from various imperial factions represented islands whose unique characteristics or strategic importance made them valuable as meeting grounds where different organizations could conduct business without triggering the territorial instincts that governed behavior within clearly claimed domains. Sabaody Archipelago's function as the final stop before entering the New World had made it essential neutral ground where even emperor crews exercised restraint to avoid disrupting the flow of new pirates whose eventual recruitment or elimination provided all factions with opportunities to strengthen their own organizations. Water 7's reputation as the world's premier shipbuilding center had granted it a form of diplomatic immunity that transcended normal territorial considerations, its services too valuable to any organization that depended on maritime mobility for emperor factions to risk alienating through aggressive behavior that might drive its craftsmen to relocate their operations elsewhere. The Galilar Company's ability to maintain relationships with pirates, marines, and government officials simultaneously demonstrated how specialized expertise could create forms of power that operated independently of the strength-based hierarchies that characterized most New World politics. The islands that chose to remain unaffiliated with any emperor organization faced constant pressure from multiple directions, their independence maintained only through combinations of geographic isolation, lack of valuable resources, or populations whose collective strength made conquest more expensive than the potential rewards justified. These free territories often served as refuges for individuals fleeing from various imperial domains, their populations swelled by those who preferred the uncertainty of complete freedom to the security that came with accepting someone else's authority over their daily lives. The evolution of territorial boundaries over time reflected the dynamic nature of imperial power in an environment where strength was the ultimate arbiter of all disputes. Islands switching allegiance or changing hands as the relative capabilities of different factions shifted through recruitment, technological advancement, or the simple passage of time that saw once mighty leaders age beyond their prime, while new challengers emerged to test their continued worthiness to hold positions of authority. The cultural impact that different emperors had on their territories extended far beyond immediate political control to influence art, music, cuisine, and social customs in ways that often persisted long after the original rulers had been defeated or moved on to other concerns. Big Mom's celebration of diversity had encouraged artistic expression that incorporated elements from dozens of different racial traditions, creating fusion styles that might never have emerged without her insistence that all peoples should be capable of coexisting within her vision of perfect harmony. Kaido's emphasis on strength above all other virtues had transformed Wano's traditional warrior culture into something harder and more brutal, his influence corrupting ancient codes of honor into justifications for casual violence against anyone perceived as weak or insufficiently devoted to the principle that might made right. The samurai traditions that had once emphasized protection of the innocent became twisted into celebrations of power for its own sake. The philosophical foundations of an entire civilization altered to match the worldview of someone who recognized no authority beyond personal strength. The trade networks that connected various emperor territories created economic relationships that often transcended political boundaries. Merchants and transporters, developing the skills necessary to navigate between different jurisdictions, whose laws and customs might vary dramatically, yet whose resources complemented each other in ways that made commerce profitable despite the risks involved in crossing domains controlled by individuals whose disputes could erupt into devastating warfare with little warning. The information networks that paralleled these trade relationships provided intelligence services that rivaled anything the world government had developed. Emperor organizations, maintaining awareness of developments throughout their rivals' territories through webs of contacts that included merchants, travelers, and even members of supposedly opposing factions who found it advantageous to maintain relationships that transcended their official allegiances. The impact that emperor rule had on ordinary citizens varied tremendously depending on their particular ruler's philosophy and the specific circumstances of their island's incorporation into imperial territory, some experiencing improvements in security and prosperity that far exceeded what world government membership had provided, while others found themselves subject to exploitation that made their previous circumstances seem idyllic by comparison. The diversity of experiences under imperial rule demonstrated that the system was capable of producing both genuine benefits and devastating harm depending on the character and priorities of those who wielded such overwhelming power. The legacy of imperial territorial control would outlast the individual emperors who established it. The governmental structures, economic systems, and cultural changes they implemented, continuing to influence their former subjects long after their creators had departed from the political stage. The proof that alternatives to world government authority could provide effective governance for large populations had implications that extended far beyond the New World to influence how people throughout the world thought about the relationship between rulers and ruled, power and responsibility, individual strength and collective welfare. The pursuit of the One Piece represents the ultimate convergence of ambition, capability, and destiny in a world where the greatest treasure ever accumulated by human hands remains hidden behind barriers that have proven insurmountable to all but one man in the history of piracy, its location known only to those who possess the knowledge to decipher ancient stones whose secrets have been scattered across the most dangerous waters in existence, specifically to ensure that only the most worthy would ever have the opportunity to claim what Gold D. Roger left behind. The emperors who rule the New World find themselves in the unique position of possessing the resources, influence, and raw power necessary to pursue this ultimate prize. Yet, their very strength creates complications and responsibilities that make the simple act of treasure hunting far more complex than it might appear to those who have never commanded territories spanning multiple islands or crews, numbering in the tens of thousands. The road poneglyphs that serve as the keys to reaching Laugh-Tale represent perhaps the most exclusive form of currency in the world, ancient artifacts whose rubbings must be collected and interpreted by scholars capable of reading the forgotten language in which their crucial information was inscribed centuries ago, by those who understood that knowledge too dangerous for the present age might someday be needed by future generations brave enough to challenge the systems that their contemporaries had accepted as immutable. The 4 stones scattered throughout the New World ensure that no single organization can simply stumble upon the final island through luck or accident, requiring instead the kind of systematic approach that only emperors possess the resources to undertake effectively. Big Mom's possession of one road poneglyph had provided her with a significant advantage in the race toward becoming Pirate King. Yet her fundamental lack of interest in pursuing that goal, beyond its symbolic value, had meant that the stone served primarily as deterrent to rivals who might otherwise have considered challenging her territorial claims rather than as the foundation for serious exploration of what lay beyond the known world. Her copy of the ancient text remained locked away in her treasury like any other valuable possession, its true worth recognized, but not actively pursued because her dreams focused on reshaping the current world, rather than discovering what secrets the previous era might have hidden. Kaido's road poneglyph had represented a similar strategic asset, whose value lay as much in denying access to potential rivals as in any personal ambition to claim Roger's treasure. His philosophy that strength was the only virtue worth respecting, making him more interested in proving his superiority through direct combat than in pursuing goals that required the kind of scholarly research and careful navigation that successful treasure hunting demanded. The stone's presence in Wano had served primarily to attract challengers who might provide him with the worthy battles he craved, its true purpose as a navigational aid secondary to its function as bait for drawing powerful opponents into his domain. The challenge of collecting all 4 road poneglyphs extends far beyond simple acquisition to encompass the political and military complications that arise when multiple emperor-level organizations compete for access to resources that exist in finite quantities, each stone's location representing not just a destination to be reached, but a fortress to be breached, and a guardian to be overcome through applications of force that would reshape entire regions, regardless of who emerged victorious from such conflicts. The implications of serious competition for these artifacts could destabilize the careful balance that prevents the New World from descending into constant warfare between factions whose clashes would make the paramount war seem like a minor skirmish by comparison. Nico Robin's unique ability to read the ancient language in which the road poneglyphs were inscribed had made her perhaps the most valuable individual in the world. From the perspective of anyone seriously pursuing the One Piece, her service is essential for translating the geographical coordinates and navigational instructions that would guide a crew to Laugh Tale once all 4 stones had been located and their rubbings properly analyzed. The world government's decades-long pursuit of her reflected not just their determination to prevent pirates from reaching the final island, but their understanding that knowledge itself could be more dangerous than any weapon. When it revealed truths that challenged the foundational assumptions upon which their authority was built, the intellectual challenge of interpreting the road poneglyphs requires more than simple translation skills, demanding understanding of ancient cartographic techniques, obsolete navigational methods, and cultural contexts that have been lost to all but the most dedicated scholars, willing to dedicate their lives to preserving knowledge that mainstream academic institutions have declared either irrelevant or too dangerous for general study. The coordinates encoded within the stones operate according to systems that predate modern navigation by centuries, requiring interpreters who can think like their predecessors while adapting ancient information to contemporary maritime technology. The Straw Hat Pirates' advantage in this ultimate treasure hunt derives not just from Robin's irreplaceable translation abilities, but from their crew's unique combination of navigational expertise, archaeological knowledge, and the kind of luck that seems to manifest around individuals whose commitment to their dreams transcends rational calculation of odds and obstacles. Nami's skills as a navigator provide them with the technical capability to follow whatever course the road poneglyphs reveal, while Luffy's instinctive understanding of what drives people to pursue impossible goals ensures that they approach each challenge with the kind of determination that can overcome barriers that would stop more cautious or calculating competitors. The territories controlled by various emperors provide them with the logistical support necessary for extended exploration campaigns that might require months or even years to complete. Their ability to outfit and supply expeditions on the scale that serious poneglyph hunting demands, representing advantages that individual crews or smaller organizations simply cannot match, regardless of their personal determination or skill levels. The maintenance of fleets capable of operating in the most dangerous waters, while carrying sufficient provisions and equipment for extended voyages, requires industrial capacity and organizational sophistication that only imperial-scale operations can provide. The intelligence networks maintained by Emperor organizations offer another crucial advantage in the competition for road poneglyphs. Their extensive contacts throughout the New World providing them with information about potential stone locations, rival expeditions, and changing political circumstances that might create opportunities to acquire artifacts that have remained beyond reach under previous conditions. The ability to coordinate multiple simultaneous investigations while maintaining operational security that prevents competitors from learning about their activities represents capabilities that develop naturally from managing territories and populations on imperial scales. The protection that Emperor status provides becomes particularly valuable when pursuing treasures that attract attention from the world government and other factions whose opposition to such quests extends beyond simple competition to encompass active hostility toward anyone who might discover information that challenges established power structures. The deterrent effect of being known as someone capable of retaliating against interference on scales that could devastate entire regions provides emperors with freedom of action that lesser pirates cannot afford to assume when planning operations that might take them into contested or dangerous territories. The ancient weapons that various sources suggest may be connected to the One Piece or the knowledge required to reach it add another layer of complexity to the ultimate treasure hunt. Their legendary destructive capabilities, making them both invaluable strategic assets and existential threats to anyone who lacks the wisdom necessary to wield such power responsibly. The possibility that claiming Roger's treasure might also provide access to weapons capable of reshaping the world's political balance creates incentives for pursuing the One Piece that extend far beyond simple greed or desire for historical significance. Pluton's location beneath Wano and its connection to the country's traditional isolationist policies suggests that the ancient weapons were deliberately hidden in places where they would remain safe from those who might use them for conquest rather than protection. Their guardians chosen based on cultural values that emphasized responsibility over ambition and collective welfare over individual advancement. The knowledge of how to control such weapons appears to be as carefully protected as the weapons themselves, requiring not just physical access, but understanding of principles that may have been forgotten by all, but a select few who have dedicated their lives to preserving such dangerous information. Poseidon's incarnation in the form of Princess Shirahoshi demonstrates how the ancient weapons exist as more than mere objects to be claimed and wielded, their power manifesting through individuals whose moral character and personal development determine whether such capabilities will be used for creation or destruction. The responsibility that comes with controlling forces capable of commanding sea kings represents burdens that few people are psychologically equipped to handle, requiring wisdom and restraint that must be developed over time rather than simply inherited or acquired through conquest. Uranus remains the most mysterious of the ancient weapons, its nature and location unknown even to those who have spent decades researching the connections between these legendary artifacts and the broader patterns of history that may explain why they were created and hidden in the first place. The possibility that it might be connected to the world government's most closely guarded secrets adds urgency to the race for the One Piece, as knowledge of all three weapons' locations and capabilities might provide whoever claims Roger's treasure with advantages that could tip the balance of global power in ways that no amount of conventional military strength could match. The final war that many observers believe is approaching appears to be driven not just by competing ambitions for the Pirate King title, but by the convergence of multiple historical forces that have been building toward confrontation for decades or even centuries. The discovery of the One Piece, potentially serving as the catalyst that transforms long-simmering tensions into open conflict that will determine the shape of civilization for generations to come. The emperors who survive to participate in this ultimate contest will find their previous territorial disputes and personal rivalries subsumed into struggles that encompass questions about the fundamental nature of freedom, authority, and the right of individuals to determine their own destinies. The knowledge that awaits discovery at Laugh Tale may prove to be more transformative than any physical treasure. Revelations about the Void Century and the true history of the world, potentially providing whoever reaches the final island with understanding that could delegitimize the world government's authority while inspiring global revolution against systems of oppression that have shaped human civilization for 800 years. The laughter that gave the island its name suggests that whatever Roger discovered there challenged his understanding of reality in ways that could only be processed through the kind of joy that comes from recognizing truths too profound for normal emotional responses. The transformation that claiming the One Piece appears to create in those who achieve it operates according to principles that transcend simple material acquisition. The title of Pirate King, representing not just recognition of superior strength or successful treasure hunting, but acknowledgement that the bearer has demonstrated qualities of character and vision that make them worthy of the responsibilities that come with possessing knowledge capable of reshaping the world according to their understanding of what human existence should become when freed from artificial constraints that serve only to maintain the power of those who benefit from current injustices and inequalities. The commanders who served as the right hands and primary lieutenants of the four emperors represented a tier of power that existed in the narrow space between exceptional individual ability and the kind of legendary strength that defined their leaders, their positions requiring not just overwhelming combat prowess, but the psychological resilience necessary to function in close proximity to individuals whose casual expressions of displeasure could reshape landscapes and whose strategic decisions affected the lives of millions across territories that spanned multiple islands and countless smaller communities dependent on their protection. Marco the Phoenix embodied the perfect synthesis of healing and destruction that made him uniquely suited to serve as Whitebeard's primary lieutenant, his mythical Zoan devil fruit, granting him regenerative abilities that allowed him to recover from wounds that would prove fatal to anyone else, while simultaneously providing him with offensive capabilities that could match the strongest opponents in direct combat. The blue flames that characterized his transformations were not mere visual spectacle, but manifestations of life force itself made tangible, capable of healing allies while burning enemies with fire that operated according to principles that transcended normal understanding of how devil fruit powers were supposed to function. His loyalty to Whitebeard transcended simple subordination or even deep friendship to encompass something approaching filial devotion, the kind of bond that could only develop between individuals who had shared decades of triumph and tragedy, while maintaining absolute trust in each other's judgment and character. Despite the pressures that came with commanding organizations whose actions could influence the fate of entire nations, the tears that fell when his captain died represented not just personal grief, but recognition that an era of relative stability in the new world was ending, leaving those who survived to navigate a more chaotic future without the guiding presence of someone whose wisdom had been earned through experiences that spanned multiple generations. The burden that Marco carried as the de facto leader of the Whitebeard pirates following his captain's death demonstrated how the qualities necessary for serving as a trusted lieutenant did not automatically translate into the fake capabilities required for independent command. His medical training and supportive nature making him better suited for preserving what already existed rather than creating new structures or pursuing ambitious expansion that might have allowed the crew to maintain their position among the world's most powerful organizations. The payback war that resulted in their defeat by the Blackbeard pirates revealed the limitations of leadership styles that prioritize loyalty and tradition over the kind of ruthless pragmatism that their enemies employed without hesitation or moral constraint. Charlotte Katakuri's perfect record of victories had become both his greatest strength and his most significant psychological burden, the expectation that he would never lose, creating pressure that shaped every aspect of his approach to combat and leadership, while forcing him to maintain a facade of invincibility that isolated him from the kind of genuine, human connections that might have provided emotional support during moments when the weight of constantly meeting impossible expectations threatened to overwhelm even his exceptional mental resilience. His mastery of observation haki reached levels that bordered on genuine precognition, his ability to perceive future events, allowing him to anticipate and counter opponent strategies before they could be fully implemented, while simultaneously creating tactical advantages that made him nearly impossible to surprise or outmaneuver through conventional means. The mochi powers granted by his special paramecia devil fruit provided him with offensive and defensive capabilities that could adapt to virtually any combat situation. His ability to transform his body into a substance that combined the flexibility of liquid with the hardness of solid matter, making him capable of matching any opponent's approach while maintaining advantages in range and versatility. The revelation of his true face beneath the scarf he wore to conceal what he considered a shameful imperfection demonstrated how even the most seemingly confident individuals could harbor insecurities that shaped their behavior in ways that contradicted their public personas. His embarrassment about his pelican eel-like mouth, reflecting deeper anxieties about living up to the image of perfection that his family and subordinates had constructed around his legendary combat record. The moment when Luffy acknowledged his strength, while accepting his flaws, represented perhaps the first time in his adult life that someone had offered him recognition that was not conditional on maintaining impossible standards. His decision to honor Luffy's victory by allowing him to escape rather than pursuing continued combat, despite having opportunities to prevent his departure, marked a fundamental shift in his understanding of what true strength meant. The recognition that someone who could maintain their principles, even when facing overwhelming opposition, possessed qualities that transcended simple combat effectiveness or tactical superiority. The respect that developed between them during their extended battle created bonds that operated outside the normal boundaries of crew loyalty or family obligation. King the Wildfire carried within his genetic heritage the memory of an entire race that had been systematically exterminated by those who feared the natural advantages that Lunarian physiology provided. His flames burning with temperatures that reflected not just devil fruit enhancement, but the concentrated rage of someone who understood that his very existence was considered a threat by those who had claimed authority over who deserved to survive in a world where difference was often treated as justification for elimination. His loyalty to Kaido was built not on fear or simple pragmatic calculation, but on genuine gratitude towards someone whose strength was absolute enough to provide protection for the last known survivor of a people whose extinction had been orchestrated by the same world government that claimed to represent justice and order throughout the globe. The mask he wore concealed not just his facial features, but his emotional responses to a world that had taught him that revealing vulnerability was equivalent to inviting destruction from those who viewed compassion as weakness to be exploited. The ancient Zoan powers that he had developed through his Ryu no Mi model, Pteranodon, granted him aerial combat capabilities that made him uniquely dangerous to opponents who lacked similar mobility. His ability to engage enemies from 3 dimensions while maintaining the defensive advantages that his Lunarian heritage provided, creating tactical situations where conventional fighting strategies proved inadequate for dealing with someone who could attack from angles that most warriors never dared learn to defend against effectively. His role as Kaido's primary enforcer required him to make decisions that balanced his personal code of honor against the practical necessities of maintaining order within an organization whose philosophy emphasized strength above all other considerations. His willingness to eliminate threats to his captain's authority, reflecting not casual cruelty, but genuine understanding of how quickly challenges to imperial power could escalate into conflicts that threatened everyone who depended on that power for protection. Ben Beckman's reputation as one of the most intellectually gifted individuals in the New World made him perhaps the most dangerous first mate among all the Emperor crews, his strategic thinking providing the analytical foundation that allowed Shanks to pursue objectives that operated on complexity levels that would have overwhelmed leaders who relied solely on instinct and personal charisma to guide their decision-making processes. The casual manner in which even Marine admirals treated his presence as a genuine threat demonstrated respect that was earned through consistent demonstration of capabilities that extended far beyond conventional combat prowess. His understanding of how political systems functioned at both local and global levels provided the Red Hair Pirates with intelligence and planning capabilities that rivaled anything the world government's own strategic departments could produce. His ability to predict how various factions would respond to different stimuli, allowing Shanks to position himself and his crew in ways that maximized their influence while minimizing the risks that came with operating in environments where a single miscalculation could trigger conflicts that would destabilize entire regions. The rifle that served as his primary weapon was less important than the mind that guided its use. His marksmanship abilities, enhanced by tactical awareness that allowed him to identify the precise moments when a single well-placed shot could alter the trajectory of entire battles without requiring the kind of overwhelming force applications that other crews relied upon to achieve similar strategic objectives. His presence on any battlefield served as force multiplier that transformed his crewmates' individual capabilities into collective power that exceeded what their numbers might suggest possible. His relationship with Shanks represented the kind of partnership that could only develop between individuals whose complementary skills created synergies that made both more effective than either could have been operating independently, their coordination so seamless that distinguishing between the captain's strategic vision and the first mate's tactical implementation became impossible for outside observers attempting to understand how their organization achieved results that seemed to require capabilities that no single crew should have been able to develop. The responsibility that commanders bore for the welfare of their subordinates created psychological pressures that went far beyond the immediate demands of combat leadership, their decisions affecting not just the success or failure of individual missions, but the long-term survival prospects of thousands of crew members, whose lives depended on their ability to balance aggressive pursuit of objectives against careful risk management that prevented catastrophic losses from eliminating their organization's ability to continue functioning effectively. The individual dreams that motivated these commanders to accept the dangers and responsibilities that came with serving under emperors reflected ambitions that went beyond simple loyalty or desire for protection, their personal goals requiring the resources and opportunities that only imperial-scale organizations could provide, while simultaneously creating potential conflicts between their individual aspirations and their duties to serve their captain's broader strategic vision. The evolution of commander relationships with their emperors over time demonstrated how successful leadership required adaptability and mutual growth. The most effective partnerships being those where both individuals developed new capabilities and understanding through their shared experiences, while maintaining the fundamental trust and respect that had originally brought them together. Despite the pressures that could strain even the strongest bonds when tested by circumstances that pushed everyone involved beyond their previous limitations. The legacy that these commanders would leave extended beyond their immediate contributions to their crew's success to encompass the examples they provided of how exceptional individuals could choose to use their strength in service of causes larger than personal advancement, their willingness to subordinate their own interests to collective goals, demonstrating forms of leadership that inspired others to consider what might be possible when individual ambition was channeled towards shared objectives rather than pursued at the expense of those who lacked comparable power or opportunity. The qualities that separated commanders who possessed the potential for independent emperor status from those whose capabilities, however exceptional, remained best suited for supporting roles, reflected not just differences in raw power, but fundamental variations in psychological makeup and personal vision that determined whether someone was capable of inspiring the kind of loyalty, respect that imperial leadership required, while simultaneously bearing the isolation and responsibility that came with making decisions that affected millions of lives across territories too vast for any individual to monitor or control directly through personal presence alone. The four emperors represent more than mere pirates. They are forces of nature, shapers of destiny, living legends whose very existence reminds the world that true freedom comes only through overwhelming strength. Each has carved their name into history through different means. Whitebeard through paternal love, Big Mom through twisted dreams, Kaido through absolute dominance, Shanks through balanced wisdom, Blackbeard through patient scheming, and Luffy through liberating joy. Their reigns have shown us that power without purpose is merely destruction, but power guided by conviction can reshape the very foundations of the world. As their stories continue to unfold across the endless seas, we are reminded that empires rise and fall like tides, but the dreams that drive them toward greatness are eternal. The boy who once gazed up at these titans with wonder has now joined their ranks, carrying with him the promise that the age of emperors may yet give way to something greater. An age where the seas truly belong to those brave enough to chase their dreams upon them. Rest now, and let the legends of ultimate power guide you toward peaceful slumber, knowing that somewhere beyond the horizon, the greatest adventure continues to unfold.